Hello and welcome to Two Blokes in a Cave, a podcast hosted by me, Carlson Sin, a traditional Catholic and part-time philosophy enjoyer, and my good friend Cameron, the resident philosophical expert and government employee. Cameron, how you doing?
Good. I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for being here, mate. It's good.
It's on me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we've got a pretty good conversation today. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of that conversation, let's just talk a little bit about, broadly, what masculinity is and maybe how it's misconstrued in today's sort of society. So I guess, Cameron, what's your general thoughts when you hear the word masculinity? What comes to mind and how does that fit into your frame as a sort of philosophical classicist, as it were?
I think of the devil and the patriarchy. No, I don't. It's a lot. Masculinity, it's a set of values, a set of way of being. It's kind of hard these days. I think part of the problem we're going to talk about it is I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's really because it's been kind of mixed up with a whole bunch of stuff and no one even really knows what it is.
Pretty
anymore.
political, doesn't it? Really, when you think about masculinity and stuff. I actually think, perhaps more interestingly, masculinity is, as it progresses through civilization, it makes itself redundant. And what I mean by that is the kind of, well, I guess I'm going to backtrack. Masculinity, I feel, is obviously inherently manly. It is of the testosterone sort of stream. And it is the aggressive, wild, independent, build-it-yourself type of force in the world, perhaps. So the kind of people that you would want to build a civilization on a frontier town would be your hyper-masculine, independent, look after yourself, building things, hard work, physical labor, dangerous. That's the kind of stuff that would come to my mind. But as a society, over time, as we build out our infrastructure and develop our culture, we tend to become less general and more specialized in nature. And what I mean by that is my granddad could build a house, change it, do a service on his car, and then he would go to his day job, and it would be neither carpentry nor mechanical work, but he would know how to do all those things. And today, if you look at the way houses are built, they get a team of people who will come in and do the framing, and a team of people will come in and do the roofing and the guttering. It's all different people. So like the skill set is so specific, and on a purely material capital side, it is more efficient. So business would tend to swerve in that direction from a pure market efficiency standpoint. But it does remove sort of the broad compassing skill set that you would need. Obviously, if one of these people that doesn't know how to do guttering is in the middle of nowhere, he doesn't know how to do framing. He doesn't do that. But he's a builder, by title. So I guess my point broadly is as we develop our civilization and people become more specialized, we outsource our masculinity. In the past, it would be the man's job to be not just the provider, but the protector. So if someone comes onto your property or tries to mug you or steal from you or in any way dishonor you or your family, you would be the first port of call to prevent that from happening and maybe to rectify the ailment yourself. But now, the first thing we're told to do as a society is call the police and wait for somebody else to take care of it, as if you no longer have that responsibility. It's been taken away from you. And broadly speaking, that might be, I make no claims if it is or isn't. I suspect perhaps not, but we make these claims that we don't need cowboys, quote unquote, to be beating people up that come into their house and things of that nature. We should let the professionals do it. So I suspect we see the decrease in general testosterone and masculinity because we don't have a need for it. We've kind of developed ourselves past needing masculine men. What we need now is, fairly docile, follow the rules that we've laid out that are, in broad strokes, fair and just, and let the system take its course. Whereas the old days, you'd go, well, there is no system, so you want justice, you've got to go out there and get it. That's my quick take. So
that's a lot of points. I can cover a lot of things there.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I do agree with parts of that. I think So we're outsourcing the masculinity, I think, for sure,
definitely.
to the government, a potential or
if
some
your
extra.
house caught on fire,
Yeah.
would your first thought be to get a hose and put it out, or would it be to call the firefighters?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Depends how far the fire had progressed.
But you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't even matter because
Yeah.
they're still going to be 10 minutes away, you would expect,
Yeah.
unless you're very lucky and close by to a station. It's something that I think maybe masculinity could be characterized efficiently as wild action. You know, like it is something that you do things. It's a manly trait. It's a masculine trait to act, to do, to conquer, to build, to destroy. And that's why you see in small boys, for those of us with small children, my son loves to build blocks, but he equally likes to smash them down.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the difference. I'm sure fathers of daughters out there will notice that their girls don't often do that. But there is something about boys and destroying. I think that's an innate nature to men. But I think most people now would think maybe the fire's a bad example because hopefully you would. But if someone's trying to break into your house, you probably lock yourself into a room and call the police and hope they get there before the intruders do anything. Your first thought's probably not, let's get out there and mano this guy. And maybe that's because, I'm not backing any jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe that's part of it. But maybe also,
good.
like, you don't believe it's your responsibility anymore. And you think that, hey, we've got this system of police that exists for this purpose, and we should be calling them. And I guess I would disagree with that. But I think the course of nature would show that seems to be the trend line. Like, you want your rugged, tough, independent builders until you don't need them. And then you kind of replace them with maybe some soy drinking tech bros. You know what I mean? Like, there's a different type of person that would thrive.
Yeah.
You couldn't take your great-granddad and put him in society today. He wouldn't flourish probably the same way that maybe...
I'm assuming most great-granddads might get cancelled, I suppose, just for other reasons, but yeah.
But you would think the kind of men that they were, they probably... you just look at revolutions or the way men have been called to action in the past over like a 2% tax on a breakfast beverage.
Oh, yeah.
Crazy. And now it's like, hey, mate, we're talking about 40% income tax. You're going, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
But people take it now because the system is so all-encompassing. It's almost you're trading away your liberty for convenience. And for men, I think so much of our innate drive in life is to build if it's properly channeled. And a lot of that has been taken from us. And I think maybe that's an issue with a lot of men these days, lack of purpose, lack of drive. Or maybe it's been taken away from them. They don't have an outlet to express their masculinity properly. And if it's unchecked, you get the flip side, which is to destroy what you built. That kind of anarchy, knocking the tower down, retreating into yourself and being sort of violent and hateful. Because on the same token, that the rugged outlaw is a masculine man, he's also a bad man. And you need a really strong man, another equally masculine man, to counter that. You can't counter masculinity with femininity. It's apples and oranges.
Yeah. It's a really tough one because this is covering a lot of different concepts. And to me, it's hard for me to even really define masculinity and femininity. Like, if we're talking about actions and abilities that fall into two different camps, or we're talking about behaviors and approaches to mental a way of doing things. Like, for example, some things aren't inherently one or the other. You can driving a car. Is it? But that's what I mean. Are we putting it into things?
Is that social construct?
Is doing stuff more
well, it's
masculine,
usually
in general?
I think I've had explained by me anyway. I'm not sure how true it is, but the reason most men drive in relationships, it's just a spatial awareness thing that men on aggregate are better than women on aggregate.
I've heard that. Yeah.
I know
to do with
don't believe your line. No, that is a real
do with reaction
thing.
times.
Yeah,
and
it's reaction times, spatial awareness, and being more comfortable, I guess, in a physical space like driving or sports, things of that nature. Typically more, or maybe the best way would be more natural, become more easy to a man
but that's like an ability or an inherent ability, I guess. Not you can have a super feminine person who is also a spectacular driver.
Yeah, but not on average. So I could say, like, on average, men are stronger than women. You could say, well, maybe there's a woman out there that's stronger than me. Well, yeah, but that doesn't prove that women are equal in strength or stronger than men. It just means that there are outliers to all. And I think looking on that note, like men and women on the scale arrange themselves very differently. Men are far more varied in their degree of mouth breathing and genius. We have a lot more people that are not as intellectual, and then we have a lot of people that are quite brilliant. Yeah. But women do collect in the mean. I think I haven't got the numbers. I think it's like 90-95% of women are in that, in the middle, in the mean. Yeah. And there are very few, like, I think if we have a look at the stats from memory, I think the chances of a baby being born with Down syndrome as a woman, it's 10%.
Okay.
So most Down syndrome babies that you see are men. Right. But the chances of it being a man.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So it should be like 9 to 1 or something.
Yeah. So like if you had 10 babies and they've got Down syndrome, mostly they're going to be dudes. Right. Or if there's any issue at all in utero, mostly it affects the men. Partly because we all start as women or something like that. There's probably some other factors there, but also men tend to just be more varied and spread out across the sort of IQ charts as a general representation.
Right, okay.
And women, typically, and even, for athletic and physical ability, men and women are vastly different on aggregate. We have a lot more men that are just not gifted. And we have a lot more men that pick up an act and it's like blood DNA memories coming back and you can swing an act. Do you know what I mean? Like there's just a very different way of going about it. So if you look at masculinity, trying to define what it is specifically, well, there is an innate biological makeup of masculinity, and that would be the testosterone that men have. Obviously, women have testosterone in very small amounts comparatively, but men have testosterone that certainly drives the masculinity. There's also, I would imagine, a physiological masculinity and a social aspect of masculinity, like the way you dress can be masculine. And the flip side, obviously, femininity, what that entails, like that there are things that would happen. You wouldn't want to see your mother in a pair of stubbies and some steel caps on the job site, because that's a masculine iconography, right? And you wouldn't expect to see a woman there. And obviously, for whatever reason, that we're trying to change that and kind of go against what you call it nature, you call it the divine will, whatever you like. But there is a path of least resistance. And I think it's why men typically do better at certain things. Probably why men do, on average, much worse at something like a school, which is a very much a more feminine environment, less hands-on, less spatial awareness, less sort of masculine activity. It's much more docile. Sit down. Let's talk about things. Let's lecture to you. Let's read. Where boys, and I certainly know for myself, learn by doing. And you want to be outside. Some of the things. I remember throwing the football with my father and talking about math. That kind of makes sense. Doing some long division, throwing the football. Like it seems to move the cogs a bit more easily. Like if I'm sitting in a classroom and you're not engaged actively, it might be much more difficult to retain some of that knowledge, particularly if you are a man and there is like a lot of the hormones flushing. You want to be moving. I think you want to be moving.
I agree with that,
it's
for
active.
Sure.
It's active and passive, and like even sexually, like you have an active and a passive participant. So in all of life, who's expected to make the first move in a romantic environment? It does fall on the active participant. I think benefits and pros, but that would be, I guess, me broadly kind of trying to describe masculinity.
Yeah, I get that. It's I was making some notes as you were speaking. It's sort of, I feel like it's born through biology to begin with, and it's like the human biology, and then it's kind of expressed as an action through a cultural instance. Like, for example, let's just go like men are on a whole stronger. Therefore, the actions that represent someone who is stronger are now associated with masculinity. But you could get like a person who was a bodybuilder, a huge dude, beard, whatever you'd call traditionally masculine, and then they could be super feminine in general. You know what I mean? Like it's a biology, but it's expressed in an action certain way. Like for example, what's something that's like kind of hard, like ballet.
Yeah.
A lot of people would consider just feminine on a whole.
Yeah.
But you can get a very masculine ballet dancer.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think I wouldn't put ballet as feminine, but I understand where there would be, like, my father would definitely call dancing.
Yeah. See, then that's a bit
but
like
that's
a
not
twist.
like is that maybe an unordered way of looking at the world, or maybe looking at a world through a very narrow. And I don't want to use the word toxic or hegemonic, but there are aspects of masculinity that perhaps are perverted into, if it's not in a very, very narrowly confined box, it's not masculine, or it's feminine. Well, that's not necessarily true. Obviously, we know. For example, ballet dancing is a tremendous art in and of itself, and the body control and the training and dedication is as equal to a footballer.
It's probably harder to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not any less physically demanding. Those guys are very, very strong to lift up their partners and twirl about and on your tippy toes and all the rest of it. I'm not a massive ballet guy, obviously, but you know, like it's not as if it's like some effeminate, soft situation. Like these people are dedicated and train and work physically, aren't what you would consider like a weak, scrawny looking, like they're, you know, perfectly masculine looking men.
It's true. But I guess what you said, that's the active passive thing. Like there is a person who gets thrown, and there's a person who does the throwing.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a person who does the like sort of specific moves and the ones that are lovely and fluid and spin around.
Yeah.
And then there's one who does. I saw the Bolshoi once, and it was like about 5 minutes, and then just stomping, doing flips and stuff. And the woman's version is twirling and whatever. I mean,
softer.
Yeah, it's softer. It's hard to define like that. And I'm trying to get in my head a point of like how that really affects society and how much it's lessened or increased.
Well, what do you think broadly the role of men in society? How do you see the role of men in society change? Because even my father-in-law would say, if you come into my house at 2 a.m, I'm not asking you any questions. I'm not asking if it's the right house or if you stumbled in here by accident.
Right, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's on site. He had 7 daughters, so he's not interested in asking why you're in someone's bedroom when you're not supposed to be. And I tend to agree with and align myself with that kind of thinking. Like, this is your house. You have a right to defend your property, your family. I think that's and I would say, I'm not sure if I've got all the legal cases, but I know in America there are stand your ground and castle laws that, you know, if you come into my property, I have the ability to
I don't think
defend
we have those, no.
No, I think
it's more of a like for equal force for equal force.
It's very, very bizarre.
If you come to my house and I've lost my way, I can't just machine gun you down.
No, which fine. I mean, look, obviously that's a relatively extreme example, but you should be able to, if you have a weapon, you should be able to use it, I think. Certainly if you pick up a baseball bat and beat the shit out of someone who comes into your house, I certainly have no sympathy for the person who's been beaten up. There's no excuse for being in someone's house at that time. And I do think, like you said, there is a difference in Australian law, certainly, where you would be probably charged with assault at the very least. I would think so.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's wrong, and an example of men losing one of their responsibilities because they have outsourced it to other men. Do you know what I mean? It's never a woman, like, you know, I don't say in a derogative way, but it's not a woman you're calling. When you call the police because you think someone's going to kill you, you're not hoping it's 2 5'3" officers coming in ponytails. You're hoping for 6 foot tall, big, strong men. Because you want to feel
That's
safe.
actually a pretty good example. Yes, I know. There's been a couple instances where someone says, like, I don't know, there might be someone who really hates the idea of masculine and feminine, but in a very specific scenario, you want a very specific person to do a specific thing, for sure. And you don't want...
You want men. You want the most masculine men you could find. Like, I want a couple of Brendans coming in.
Oh, my friend. Shout out to Brendan, he's sitting there right here. He's a big man.
Want some big boys.
Yeah, a couple of big boys.
I don't want any of these. I don't want some 120 pound scrawny IT guy coming in to help me. I want some big fellas. I want SEAL Team 6 coming in. Do you know what I mean? I want to feel safe. And I suppose the point more broadly is that you have outsourced it. You have been so masculine, or men on aggregate in the past have been so masculine that we have no need of our individual masculinity.
Interesting.
It's too much for a system. You can't, and I disagree with this point, but you can't have a nation full of men who are just walking around the streets beating the shit out of each other at their perceived grievance. Like if you heckle me, I don't have the right to beat the crap out of you.
Yeah.
But that would be, in the old days, like, hey, you've insulted my honor, fair's fair.
There'd be periods of time.
Do you know what I mean? Like, have you seen like any photos?
Someone saw you say that.
Do you remember those photos you watch, like the old photos, and all the men have these weird eyes? They're all looking at. It's because they get into lots of fights.
They're not smart.
Yeah,
they got
just
whack eyes.
They're just fighting all the time, and that's a very. You look at little boys, and it's some kids play really well together, but there's always some tension. There's a physical element to the way kids play.
Yeah,
and they will push, and usually it's just jostling and pushing. But there's like, hey, don't push me. I'm going to push you back.
Yeah,
and that kind of gets socialized out of us because we're told over and over and over that like physical contact is wrong. But is it wrong? Ultimately, like if you insult me, or I was brought up on the idea that the difference between men and women broadly in an argument and the way men conduct arguments and or debates with one another is that there is always the possibility of physical repercussions to what you say.
Right.
But women don't tend to have that. So and this is a stereotype, but you'll see oftentimes young ladies screaming and ranting and going absolutely crazy and saying things that you're like, well, she's never been punched in the face. Because if I, went up to you and I didn't know you and we start arguing and then all of a sudden I just yell out, like, your mum sucks. You're like, hang on, mate. It's crossing the line now. And this could get physical. But there's always that air of physical conflict with a man. Like if you're talking to a stranger and you start insulting his wife or children or family, there is a part of you, unless I guess you some super sheltered person, but there's a part of you that goes like, I could get punched for this. It certainly could escalate to physical confrontation. But I think, and certainly the way we are socialized, that doesn't exist on the feminine side. Like you were told your entire life, never hit a woman for any reason ever.
Yeah,
right?
pretty much.
And women, because of the more passive nature generally and the more feminine nature, they're not active enough to want to physically fight each other because the women are not of the nature to be combatants physically, broadly speaking, on aggregate.
Yeah, well, that's like that Jordan Peterson stuff, which I had to think about a fair bit. Where that's where I first heard that kind of thing, where men don't do certain things and women do certain things in certain situations because there's a threat of violence. And that's definitely the case. I mean, if I bump into someone at the club...
Shout out to Jordan Peterson. He's thinking like me.
It's very, very obvious if you're at the club or the pub. And the amount of times I've been...
wouldn't you?
Yeah, a bloke will bump into you and...
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Oh my God. I'm like, don't, it's all good. We're having a little hey, go and chat. It's all good. I've seen in the reverse, just extreme arguments blow out of nowhere. Whereas that wouldn't happen as you do because we're equally afraid. Maybe no one's afraid of me, but other men are equally afraid of each other. Yeah.
But there is a part where hang on, I don't want there to be this guy looking at me across the bar. He's got a couple of mates. I'm like, I don't want you sizing me up. I just don't want any issues because it can get physical, and I don't want to get punched in the face.
No, I'm trying to avoid that at all costs.
It's a good call.
Yeah,
this is the moneymaker. You don't want to get punched anyone. That's
no,
good.
bad.
That's good.
I think also though, that's where the negative part of it's kind of gone. So I wouldn't say if you go a few generations back, you're saying they're more masculine back there, and I would agree. They're more able. They're more competent in a lot of more areas. They're more,
how much
I guess, assertive.
Nature versus nurture. Like how much of it is you've been told to repress your masculinity?
It'll be all nurture, wouldn't it? I don't think we've changed too much over 3 generations.
Maybe my wife's into the plastics,
low
testosterone, we're off the processed food, but potentially a little bit.
I definitely think the chicken breasts.
I wouldn't recommend drinking a bunch of soy milk or something. Not good for you. But okay, so there's a general acceptance that perhaps masculinity falls over time, or at least individual masculinity, because perhaps the state is still the ultimate masculine force. Because I know I've had this argument with my mother before, and she'll go, well, paying your taxes, it's by threat of gun. Like you are threatened with, we'll put you in a cage for the rest of your life if you don't do what we say.
Yeah.
That's an extremely masculine reprisal of your actions. If you don't do what we say, you will be forcibly removed and put in a box. That's what your dad would say. Do you know what I mean? Like when you're growing up, your mum might say, "Hey, do X, Y, Z." You go, "Listen, you can't."
The box. Yeah, no.
But your dad goes like, "I will belt you if you don't do X, or if you
definitely.
disrespect." The threat of force, essentially, is what the state is. The box analogy. Hopefully, no one's been put box, but the threat of force. It's not my mum hit me with a wooden spoon once and it snapped, and I think I laughed because I'm like, well, I'm 12.
Assertive power. And if you're calling masculinity assertive, as masculinity as the trait there is, it's assertive power. The state is the most assertive, dominant power over us. I can't battle the country. I mean,
No, you would lose.
No,
Yeah.
I could try.
You would
Yeah.
lose, yeah.
So in that respect, I do agree, and I thought it was interesting. I like the concept you're saying that we're sort of outsourcing, because that's the natural progression of a lot of stuff.
Of civilization.
Yeah, and your skills are becoming lessened, but more centralized, more specialized. Yeah. So back in the day, you could probably do a lot of stuff, and now you've got someone who would literally just make one thing, one little tiny bolt,
One widget.
Yeah, one widget. There you go. That's a perfect example. Or something. That's a very good example. Now, you're more specialized over time. You technically should get paid more. There's less people who do that job, so the demand is higher for your specific skills.
Yeah.
It all works out, man. The more specialized you are as a surgeon or a doctor, the more money you'd make, the more.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I guess the better you would
become
be.
better.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Until we become all that fat kid who's flowing around in Wall-E too, is doing nothing and everything's doing it for us. But I think that's interesting, and I think on a whole, a lot of stuff isn't good when it's super centralized away from you and you give away your power. I think that's dangerous.
It's just certainly dangerous.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any philosopher or statesman in the past that would say, the best thing to do to secure liberty and freedom is to give all your liberties and freedom to the government, because they'll never do anything wrong. They'll never abuse you.
Super trustful.
Do you So I guess my point would then shift to, if we have a tentative agreement that masculinity, as expressed in the individual, on aggregate in men, has lessened over time, as we've exported more and more of our rights to the state, the progression to reverse that is impossible. Like, you could never take it back, or you could never go back to being more masculine, or maybe more clearly, I guess, your grandparents would not have stood for some of the state's mandates today because they were more masculine and independent. Like, could you imagine your grandfather's generation being told you have to stay in your house for 2 years?
It's a great question.
Probably not, because they probably had a farm or some kind to work on. They go, mate, get out of here. But do you know what I mean? Like, broadly speaking, if you try to tell your grandparents, maybe even their parents, like we're talking 1920s generation, the greatest generation, like, I would find it quite difficult to imagine a scenario where they would willingly submit themselves to a government on a scale the likes of which we saw during COVID. I don't think that would be something they would tolerate. But as we've exported our rights to the government, I think we have lost a lot of that independent action that defines civilization. Certainly Western civilization. I can't speak for things I know little of, but in the West it certainly seems some of the key pillars are liberty, even though that might be a mistake, but liberty, for liberty's sake, and the freedom. I guess we'll go the American style because it's easy to summarize: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yeah. And I think now we've exported so much of our liberties and pursuits of happiness to the government. I mean, it won't be long before you might need a permit to start a podcast.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, hey, are you guys going to talk about things that potentially could go against state narrative? So it's to me, it's very interesting. I think we can see, chart, and mark a decline in masculinity, an increase in a docile nature, and we have a society that is less free and more easily controlled than ever before.
Yeah, easily controlled, for sure.
I was quite surprised at the amount of people that believed how serious COVID was, and much less the illness itself. It was the way we treated one another. I mean, I've got family and friends that didn't take the vaccine, that were sneered at, looked at funny, ostracized, which is pretty crazy. Like, you read about it in 1984, or the Gulag Archipelago. You read about it in these sort of works, and you think that'd never happen here. That would never happen. Like, I would never do that. You know, all that famous sort of idea, like, I would never be a Nazi. Well, hang on. You would be. If you were in Germany in the 30s, you'd probably be a Nazi.
Yeah.
Like, most people haven't got a hill to die on. Or they do, it's so extreme and so outrageous. By the time they get to that hill, there's no one left. It's over. Like, everything's, you've already given up everything. Like, I know people that have lost their job, which is tremendously respectable, in my opinion, over the COVID stuff. Because it's like, hey, I have a right to my individual autonomy. I don't want to take this, which isn't a vaccine. We'll get into that another time. But like, technically, it's not a vaccine. My wife's a nurse.
Okay. No.
But it's being branded a vaccine because it tests well. It's obviously, people associate safety and whatnot, but it's not technically
like a marketing term.
Yeah.
We've tested the term, and this one sticks.
Yeah, sure. But, that kind of stuff is commendable, and there are people with hills who are like, well, what do you believe in?
Yeah.
Karen, as an example. Like, what do you believe in? Like, what would you be willing to lose your job for? Like, I'm asking you right now. Like, if your employer said, Cameron, I need you to do this, and you say, look, that crosses a line with me, personally, I'm not doing that. They go, well, you have two options.
Yeah. You
can leave now, or you can take the whatever, or do the whatever. Because there is a point that will come, regardless of, where you are, where you will be asked to do something that you might not want to do. And everyone has something. They're like, well, look, your job is in administration. If they told you to pick up a hammer and start chiseling bricks, you might be like, listen, bro, it's not what I signed up for. But,
yeah, that's right.
But there are more serious moral things that might come to you and say, look, we're the government, this is our new policy on, you now need to wear a dress one day a week to make people feel more included, or something to that effect. There's a point where you might say no. That's an extreme example.
Yeah.
They'll probably come out next year, but that's an extreme example.
I'd give it a go for one, mate.
Yeah. Looking at you, I'm not surprised you said that.
Okay. I've heard that before. I know. Well, it have to be affecting my personal integrity. Like, I mean, if they kind of come along and say, go and do this act that's physically gonna or mentally gonna harm these other people for really no good, and it's not your job description, it's not really anything to do with anything, I'd be fully against that. I mean, even little things do happen in my jobs and jobs I've had in the past where they say, go and do this, and I think, well,
It's not really what I signed up for.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's my place. If that needs to be done, maybe you do that. If you want it done so badly. But, I know what you mean. There was an interesting example I heard on someone else talking about this, and I don't really, I guess, used to really like using the COVID thing example because it goes into other realms and starts getting... Yeah, but like when they're saying how quickly the people who hated everything to do with authoritarianism were quickly...
They were authoritarian.
Jumping to...
They were loving it.
But like putting in their neighbour.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this is probably a US or a
Nazis.
Melbourne example. Yeah. Calling up and saying, I saw Joe Blow outside.
Have his mask on.
With his mask on, mowing his lawn. Come and get him. Like, I mean, that's not really helping anyone, is it? Like, no, he's not coughing.
It's interesting how quickly that would happen.
Yeah, well, that's right.
And it is, I guess, again, it's not very clear. I haven't done a very good job articulating this, but that would be, I would think, a very feminine action.
Complaining, not just joking. Yeah, right.
But dobbing in your neighbour. Yeah, partly just because part of that masculinity is an independence, and I don't care what you do or what your line is your line. It doesn't bother me if it's way further back than me. I might be, obviously smells and bells. Like, I've got different lines morally that I'm not going to cross.
Yeah.
That you might be like, I'm okay with that, being a party to that.
So it's assertive and combative, but you are calling someone else to come and help, aren't you? You're
well,
complaining
it's not really
to someone else.
You're calling a masculine person to
come and
reprimand them.
To do it.
So
right.
The meme about Karens is that they don't have, they just complain and then call dad, basically.
Right, yeah.
And liberalism is just, I hate my dad. That's what liberalism is.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Actually, yeah.
Dad is authority. I'm completely libertine. I don't want to do anything like that. I just want to do what I want.
Dad is the patriarch, isn't he? Literally, yeah.
Maybe fathers know best. Maybe. Might be the way to go.
Well, I guess that's an interesting point. I was going to say something on it. Let it come to me.
Okay, well, while you're thinking of it,
yeah.
I've got one question to kind of wrap
Go
up
for it.
this episode, and it's, I think it's an Oscar Wilde quote, and don't quote
my
me
favourite.
exactly. This, I do like
Yeah.
Oscar. He's
Quite
degenerate.
spectacular.
Also, deathbed conversion. So there's still time for you.
Is that why you like him?
No, I mean, I think he was a bit of a degenerate. So
yeah, it doesn't seem to allow your values there.
I mean, talent is talent, and I can appreciate the artist without liking the artist. But the quote goes something to the effect of, "All women become their mother. That's their tragedy. But no man lives up to his father. That is his." So I guess on aggregate, I want you to talk specifically about your father or how you feel, because it's not the place for that.
Yeah.
But like on aggregate, do you think men have failed to live up to their parents? And maybe if we take it back, which isn't, I know it's a bit cherry picking, but if we go back to the men who fought in World War One, and then the men who fought in World War Two, and then Vietnam, and then the Afghan War, and then now basically, I think there is, like, we are kind of going in the wrong direction. Like some of the masculine qualities, like honor and duty and self-sacrifice, have been lost. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of men from 18 years old signing up to fight in a huge conflict in 1914, right? Walking into machine gun bullets without thinking twice, because their honor and duty to their homeland compelled them to do so. I couldn't see that happening today.
I really don't know.
And part of it is probably, I'm too smart to do that. But, well, hang on. Well, your duty to you owe a sense of duty to your country.
Yeah.
And I don't think you'd see that today. So certainly in that respect, it's been a downgrade.
That's what I was going to actually say. It was something to do with this effect, was saying that certain qualities like honor, integrity, individualism, like sort of honouring your own self as well and your actions and your values.
Dressing
they're not
properly.
Technically, I guess they're not really masculine. There's a bit of crossover there, but we've definitely lost a lot of that. And I think a lot of people don't really want to make that hard decision of like, what should you do in this instance? They default to like maybe the groupthink and to maybe an outsourced version of like, well, I think that's bad because everyone's vaguely telling me it's bad. And it's not really the right thing to do. And that's decentralizing morals almost, I guess. So cancelling
what came first, chicken or egg? Were the morals the first to go, and then that? I would argue, obviously being Catholic, I would say that you lose your faith, you lose your culture, which is collective belief in an ideology, let's say, and you become a slave to the self. So why would you sacrifice yourself for any reason ever? Right? Like if you were living today, like, Carlton, we need you to step up and go and fight in Papua New Guinea. No?
Yeah.
I've got a family, I'm not going.
That's right, yeah.
I'm here, I don't want to die in a ditch in the jungle for the state, because I don't think the state represents my values, so I'm not doing that. But like, I don't feel any obligation or feel indebted to my country. I try to. Like, I was a part of the Army Reserves for a time, and I do try to give back. But there is a sense of, and again, I think they all devolve and they go hand in hand and they slide down the scale together. So the state's certainly no paragon of virtue right now either. No. But there's certainly
people are much more aware of that specific fact than ever before.
But yeah, like, that is something that my granddad would never have considered. I think he's like, well, if my nation needs me, God, King, country, if my nation needs me, I'm there.
Yeah, interesting. It's definitely, the more of a duty of honour to the outwardly large public.
My granddad wore a suit everywhere.
Yeah, that's the case.
Go to a ball game. But like, why do you wear a suit? And we've talked about this, and I wear a tie to work, and I know you're not a big tiger, which is fine, but you wear a tie, and people do look at you differently. People do treat you differently, because there's an air of respectability. And so much of our culture, our sort of capacity for social interaction is based on visuals. If you look and dress and present a certain way, you will be treated that way. But I think at the core of so many social issues is, well, you look and dress and treat yourself the way you are being. You treat yourself the way you present yourself the way you deserve to be treated. Basically, if you look like a slob, people will assume that you are a slob.
Yeah, and we've sort of advanced in some ways that, like, because you look like a slob doesn't mean you actually are a slob. But let's be real, if Adam Sandler rocks up and he's going to do your surgery, you think, shit, this guy's a slob.
It's not good.
He's not going to do a good job.
Yeah.
But there are some respects, I guess, what is Zuckerberg rocks up with a t-shirt and jeans in pretty much every instance.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it would, and again, I'm maybe a little bit old school, but
Yeah.
I think society would be a little bit nicer if people did dress up.
Oh, 100%.
And that's why I call it dress up, by the way. I don't call it dress down. I call it dress up because it does elevate you. I think we've lost so much of beauty is a good in and of itself. And dressing well, thinking positive, begets positivity. Good things beget more good things. Work begets work. So yeah, I would say on aggregate, maybe men do fail to live up to their fathers, which is quite a tragic realization. And maybe, obviously, there are individual men that far surpass their fathers and have great, wonderful, successful lives. But on aggregate, we've got to pull our weight a little bit here, boys. Like, we're letting the team down.
I think a few, no specifics here, but I definitely think if you ask most people from a generation, a few above, what do you think about this specific bloke who's like 22 now or something, they'd think he was a degenerate loser in lots of respects, really. So you're not wrong in that regard.
Okay. Any other final thoughts on masculinity?
It's forever. It's not. People are realizing that maybe large parts of it shouldn't be demonized, and that they're usually pretty. That's demonized.
Do you want
like
to go through
aggressiveness and
this
stuff.
weird phase, perhaps, where for some reason we're attacking men? I'm not really online that much, like I couldn't tell you, but I do hear these things. Maybe they're all extreme, but certainly we don't need men. Masculinity bad. Well, what are you talking about? Masculinity is what built this country.
Good masculinity is perfectly fine, and it's what
properly ordered, you would say.
is required in certain
And
situations.
what gives order purpose? Like maybe culture. Sort of belief system, I don't know, maybe something to do with...
Well, as a final thought, what do you think, let's say, if an entire culture was super feminine? Or an entire culture, everyone in the culture was super masculine, like a made-up culture, there's a group of people in the jungle, Amazon warriors, and they're all warrior people.
Typically very masculine people.
And they're all masculine across the board.
I know from
Versus,
my reading of some history, I know that, and this is not really answering your question, but I find it interesting and it made me think about it.
Yeah, that's okay.
If you ever look at male priests or the exclusivity of male priests, things are built up, right? Like a chapel, a cathedral, an obelisk, a pyramid, things are up, built. But if there are...
Phallic.
There is a phallic nature to it,
Right.
I'll grant that. But if you look at cultures and histories that had female priests, they're often caves. They're often down.
Oh, really?
That's not like they're worse, although, in my opinion, men should be priests.
Right.
But
also these caves are kind of phallic.
They're kind of the opposite of phallic. The
other way.
Yeah. But that's true. Like that, they would be in caves, in crevices, down. And that's not, again, it's not a better or worse thing. It's just an observation.
Yes.
But there is a genuine difference in how men and women orient themselves.
Okay. Enclosed versus building in...
Oh, yeah. There's definitely something about the phallic, just big out there, let everybody know what's going on. Boom. Here we go.
Why are we building this stuff? To get women.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's not easy. I go to Mars looking for a date.
Yeah.
So, masculinity, very important. Part of the it's a recurring theme, some of the topics that we want to cover and discuss about civilization and the role of masculinity. But I think as a decent starting point would be, masculinity has some real merit, and it may render unto itself redundancy.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Which is weird,
hey?
Render unto itself redundancy.
It's bizarre. Like,
what do you mean by that?
I mean, like, what we've been talking about, like, you need masculinity, very masculine people, to conquer the wild and tame it. And once it's tamed, we don't need that masculinity anymore.
Yeah, right.
So, like, hey, I need you to take your masculinity to 10, I need you to drop it all the way to a 3.
Right.
I need you to just stay right there.
Stuff was bad, we needed it. But now it's really good, we don't like it anymore.
Yeah, well, it would be unfathomable for someone in the 60s when you had, maybe 50s, right? A more traditional outlook of the world. Hey, there are maybe roles that you should occupy because you're swimming with the current of your nature.
Yeah.
And if you suggested, and maybe masculinity is pretty crap, people would look at you and like, what's wrong with you? It's such a weird thing to say. But now we're kind of trying to we're pointing out maybe it's more evident now. We don't need masculinity. The state's dad. We don't need
that
your
stuff.
dad.
That's
interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. I'm going to think about this one for sure. It'll come up in the next podcast. It's a side little note, Final thoughts again. What about final thoughts from you? You got any little final things? Or the quote from Oscar Wilde was... I
thought that was a cool way to wrap up masculinity, because I do think it is almost a tragedy. And that meme where it's hard times create strong men.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
And it's cycles.
Are we in the soft times? No, we're in the soft
We're in the hard times, I think.
I think we're in the soft people times.
Soft people times. So hang on, what does it go? It goes, hard times create strong men men create good times times create soft men create hard times. So maybe we're the soft men.
Creating hard times.
And I think things are hard. I mean, like I won't get too into it, we'll never end. But things are going in the wrong direction. I think broadly, most people would be angry at the direction, and then yet we would still argue about which direction we should go.
Yeah,
no one's happy with where we're going.
No, they're not. No one's happy with any of it.
There's no lefties, there's no righties, no one. He's like, I am so glad we're going in this. Everyone hates it, but we continue to march in the wrong direction. And that should tell people something, like, doesn't matter who's in power, we're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
You know what's going on?
Yeah, whatever we're doing, no one's enjoying any of it.
Yeah, like, what if we change Parliament and then we continue in the same trajectory? Like, this is not working.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much. This has been Two Blokes in a Cave. We're hoping to get out of the cave. Until next time, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ed.
See you later.